Okay, here we are back again, trying to see if we can get this to work. All right, all right. Ah, hello. Hello, thank you all very much. I apologize for the late start today. I just had some technical difficulties with one computer, and I thought it was all logged on, and now I have a light behind my head. Well, anyways, thank you for coming. What I'm planning to do with this meeting of Citizen Advocate Network is first to talk a little bit about what we're about and what I think we should be about, and then to sort of go further into what we discussed last week in terms of healthcare advocacy and generally what it is to be an advocate for others. So anyways, I'm also going to be doing this on, I want to try doing this on Facebook Live as well, so that people can know about it and be able to reference it there if you have any need to. And so just be aware of that. I mean, after I sort of make my opening statement that I will, like anybody who wants to be a panelist and has things to say about this, can be promoted to panelists, and we'll do that. But this is basically this is something that's just sort of new, a kind of new idea that I think of an issue that needs to be addressed, of what we can do to help others in terms of using our voice, because I think that one of the things that's really difficult for people and for anybody when they have to end up dealing with a system, whether it's the healthcare system or the justice system or any sort of like large bureaucratic system, if you're sort of isolated, you have to it's very difficult. It's very difficult if you're on your own. So that's why it's important to have advocates for others. So anyways, I'm trying to get this live on Facebook, but it's not, seems to be working too well, but I think hopefully we'll get there. But I think that it is important to be advocates. First of all, I think that just the whole idea of being an advocate is something that we all should embrace and work at being better at, in terms of to advocate for ourselves, to advocate for whatever cause we may believe in, and also I feel most importantly to advocate for others, because that's what people need to get help. So and that's basically what this is about. This is not, okay, let's see. Trying to go live on Facebook, but we'll see what happens with my various connections here. So I thank you for your patience, for bearing with me with this. And I do just wanted to see once more if it is, well, I guess, I don't know. I did a little promo earlier to try and see if I could post a Facebook Live, just to do a little description in this this Citizen Advocate Network group as to what this group is about. And it worked eventually, but now it does not seem to be working. So in the I will be able to, I will either see about posting it later on Facebook or onto YouTube, and I apologize. So this will not be going live, but we'll be recording it. Before I started today, I wanted to just share on one of my teachers, Kristen Linklater, just died on Friday, and she was a voice teacher. She's, I think, probably one of the most important voice teachers of probably the last century. She wrote two amazing books, Freeing the Natural Voice and Freeing Shakespeare's Voice. And I was fortunate enough to study with her at Shakespeare and Company. and she was an amazing teacher, and also a very frightening teacher, but really mostly just an amazing teacher. And what she really taught me about was to understand Shakespeare in a more visceral sense, and to also to understand um, what power we have in our voices. That's why I really think it's important to bring her up in talking about advocacy, because advocacy is about raising our voice. And I think that we have to be open to a lot of different ways to raise our voice. I'm very excited about so many people who are out raising their voices in protest against the systemic racism in our society, and the many other issues of police violence, and so many issues, and also while we're also having to deal with where we're at. But I think that we also need to be able to raise our voices for individuals, for specific cases. And sometimes it's much easier to make a sort of a big sort of general point, and it's much harder to continue on with the day-to-day work of actually being there to advocate for people and to help them. And that is what I think is something that is an untapped potential in a lot of us. I've just sort of recently been trying to help out some friends, and as ineffectual as I may be in it, I'm at least learning to use my voice to advocate for people, and I think that's important. I mean, I think it's also it's a way to sort of try and look at a situation, to be realistic in a particular situation as to what can be done and what can be done to help. And I mean, there are a lot of things in our society that seem just so many huge problems. How can we possibly face them all? And I think part of the way how we face them all is, I mean, we have to acknowledge, and sometimes it feels very overwhelming, but at other times we have to think about what we can actually do. And if we can do a little bit to help in a specific way, then that is amazing. Because I think that one of the things that happens in so many of the narratives and the way society works for putting systems and processes and all of these things is that people sort of can get ground down. And I say by being an advocate, we want to put people first, and we want to put people's concerns first. And I think one of the places where this is really difficult in our society is with healthcare. And so that is why last week we talked a lot about like what it is to be a healthcare advocate for others, and how essential it is. And so today, what I think I would like to do is continue on that, get into a little more specific information. I know that Eleanor has been looking into this, and we'll see where we can go from there. But I think that that's what advocacy really is about putting people first. And so I'm going to just start making this more of a discussion. So if you want to be promoted to panelist, raise your hand and I'll promote you to panelist, and then you can share your thoughts on these things, and we will continue on with this. And and you're also perfectly welcome just to listen. But if at any point you want to then join in the discussion, you can feel free to do so. So, Eleanor, welcome. Thank you everybody who's here. Thank you for those who are joined as panelists, Eleanor and Teller, and for the rest of you. So Eleanor, I think you were you had talked a lot in terms of looking at other resources in terms of what we need to be a healthcare advocate. I mean, I've been looking up some of the things as well, and just wanted to see what you'd found out. I mean, I'm going to put together what I don't know.
I contacted Conscience and Compassion, and the person that I spoke to said that she had to send my invitation upward to her boss, who would call me. And so far, I haven't gotten a phone call back.
Okay.
So perhaps next week. But I really wanted to be able to give him a link to the previous discussion so he could be up to speed with what we'd said before.
Yeah, I know. And I'm sorry it took so long to get that up there, but it is there on the Facebook group now. I tried to post on YouTube. Didn't work so well. One of the things,
It's on the Instant Shakespeare one or on something else.
no, well, I don't think it's successfully posted, but I was doing it under my own personal Paul Sugarman rather than under Instant Shakespeare, since it's not really Instant Shakespeare. But I did look at their website, and they do have a lot of good resources, even just online, that to take from in terms of their what it is to be a. Let me just see if I can bring it up here in terms of advanced directives and the sort of forms you need to fill out to have someone else who can be a healthcare. Oh God! Now, what is the term again? The
Proxy.
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 Yeah, yeah, healthcare proxy. And so the toolkit I downloaded looked very useful. And also, as you had suggested, Teller, I was looking on AARP, and they also have a lot of useful resources on this as well, in terms of sort of state by state, what sort of are the advocacy things. Okay, I was hoping I could open it up and share my screen of the little workbook from the PDF that they have, but where it sort of talks about what you need to fill out to be a healthcare proxy and the sorts of issues that you have to deal with, which are, I guess, probably going to be somewhat different for everybody. But I think that there are, that is part of the issue, is to get someone else. I think one of the bigger questions that is also is how to reach out to people to make these sorts of connections so that people can know about issues and know how to help. And I think that one of the things that we have to sort of acknowledge is that there's so much in terms of any kind of, I don't know, I think sometimes in our society that there's a real sort of shaming aspect to it's like, well, if you don't have enough money to do something, or if you don't, if you've had some sort of problem, and or if you're up against a large bureaucracy, that you sort of feel personally ashamed in some way. And I think that part of that is is just sort of the way of the sort of systems wanting to sort of just process you in the easiest way, cheapest way for them. And that's something that you need to fight against and be able to reach out to others to ask for help. And also, I mean, I think one of the things that you also before you reach out for others to ask for help, you really need to you need to see what you can do, what your options are. And I mean, unfortunately, a lot of times these options get limited very quickly. And part of the way they get limited is that you don't really understand what the situation is until you're in the middle of it. And so that's why it's good to sort of try and plan in advance and to make these sorts of plans in terms of having a healthcare proxy and setting up someone who is in an area close enough to you, because hopefully sometimes it can be family, sometimes you have family that's further away and it's more difficult, but that is I think one of the things that we need um, uh, to deal with. So also, I just wanted to, I mean, and I think that there is, it's difficult to reach out to people, and it's difficult to need things from other people. I mean, we're sort of, I mean, even if you can't take care of all of your own needs, I mean, that's also that there's sometimes I feel like our society wants to shame that. And we need to sort of get beyond that. I mean, I think, you know, in a lot of ways, sometimes I was thinking of how being an advocate sort of is connected to, for me, sort of being an actor. That is an actor that you, as a character, you have to figure out what the character wants, what's in the way of what they want, and what they're going to do to get what they want. And I think that that is a way when we have to sort of understand a difficult situation is to look at it in that way, to see what a person wants, what's the obstacle, and then a lot of times there's like one sort of way that seems the obvious way, but that's not always going to work. And I think as an advocate, as somebody who wants to sort of engage the problem and sort of delve into it, then you can sort of look at it and hopefully find some other approach. But I think that one of the things that we also really need to be able to be successful in that approach is to connect to others, so that you can share information and get help when necessary. So that's what I think is part of what's part of this discussion.
This week, just so you know, I went on that site, and I went on the New York state site, found the appropriate forms, printed them out, and sent them to Eleanor, so that she could have them since she doesn't have the capacity to print there. What I would like to know is how I could use money to help. That is to say, if I have a friend, in New York, for example, who needs an advocate, could money help here? Are there people who are currently unemployed who would be willing to take on, for some, reasonable, not excessive, but sort of a weekly thing or a monthly thing where you'd say, I'll be on call for that kind of emergency. That would be very helpful to me if I had some source of that. At the moment, I don't know of any organization that facilitates that. I don't really know any way to get that done. Because money is one way. Money is one way to exercise force. If you're trying to help somebody, sometimes just paying a person to do a job is a way to get it done. And I'm able to afford that, so I would love to do that, but I'm kind of stranded. I don't know how to do that. My impression of large organizations that do this, and I get this impression from when I was taking care of my parents, is that large organizations tend to employ minimally responsible, resourceful people. That they tend to employ drones. And this is not a situation where you want a drone, you want an aggressive, intelligent person. And what I'm afraid of is that any professional organization would be so expensive as to be impractical. But that would be useful to me to know of any way to hook up with people who might be responsible, intelligent people who would be willing to take on as a job that advocacy.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I mean, I think you raise a lot of real concerns there, because it is also a lot of times that how to protect the individual in the face of a large company. And then if you have some other large company to advocate, you just sort of create the same sort of dynamic, which is disempowering, and sort of then the sort of lowest common denominator in terms of getting health aids that don't that just are there just for the paycheck. I mean, yeah, that is I don't know. Yeah, that's one of the things that I'm investigating to find out about, because it would seem that in a certain sort of way that you would want, that it would make more sense to have like a small group or sort of an individual behaving in a sort of more entrepreneurial fashion to be able to help with help with people who need this kind of help and might find more innovative ways to sort of deal with things. But yeah, that is an interesting question.
Yeah, I just think I think we can't be ashamed to talk about money, as you said. And sometimes money is just people sometimes need it, and sometimes really responsible people need it. So it seems like that would be, if we run into anybody who fits those qualifications, we should all tell one another. You mentioned people being more interested in helping in the abstract than in concrete. And this reminds me of a homeless guy that I was approached by on the street, who didn't say, "Could you help me?" The person said, "Could you help the homeless?" As if I wouldn't respond unless I were helping a category. Seems really strange to me.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, that is, I mean, that people are trying to, that our sort of society and the sort of way media tells stories is to sort of just fit a person into their function, as opposed to, I mean, what their individual needs are, which in any case is very different. And how to deal with that is something that we need to, I think that part of it is sort of expressing what you need, putting it out there, and then seeing what can come of it.
Well, part of what I need is a person who's not only someone who's in general competent and responsible, but someone that I can place personal trust in.
Mm. Yes, this
You
is
can't
true.
get that out of a box.
Yeah, well, I know. I think that's one of the things is that we want everybody. We want to have like simple answers to these complex questions, and there are simple answers to complex questions. Unfortunately, they're just about always wrong. Uh, complex issues require complexity in dealing with them, and that a lot of the sorts of things have created in terms of disincentives, that in sometimes we have more of a sort of parasite economy where people can make more money off of the supposed helping of people instead of actually helping them. And this is something that I think that is a problem, and that also that hopefully if we can engage people to be advocates, that people will, we can also get more people to be whistleblowers and to sort of move beyond the sort of unacceptable way that people are treated. So I think there's just a lot of issues there, and yeah, that is also a very important one, is to have personal trust in someone to be able to help with things, and that is another challenge. So if I mean, I think that also there's a lot. Yeah, I mean, there's I mean, how to sort of find a better way of being able to share our stories and in terms of and share our needs and talk about what um, what where we need help and how we can help others. So so in any event, it's also as I'm going to work at putting together, started like a Facebook group where I had posted like last week's meeting, and I'm going to try and put some more things together in writing and put together uh, these resources that are out there, and see about. I mean, I guess one of the real challenges is sort of how do you sort of form, I mean, a support group in terms of making a place where you can find people that you could trust to help with these things. I'm not really exactly sure how to do that. I mean, I think there are some models of mutual support um, that are that have been interesting, that have been successful, that wouldn't be successful in this sort of a case. I'm
Mhm.
thinking of things such as, I mean, AA and other sorts of anonymous type organizations where it's sort of about, you create something where you can share what you're going through and get seen by that. But in terms of specific help, I mean, that it's also that there is that you can't, I mean, it's part of a sort of a thing of an anonymous organization, is that it's not, well, I mean, except for any, I don't know, I don't really know specifically about those organizations because I haven't been involved, but I mean, that I just don't know. I mean, you would have like a sponsor you end up having trust with, but with others, it's you're like sort of fellow travelers, and how do you deal with those situations? Um, there is another sense in which these sorts of groups uh, are sort of, I mean, tying into the overriding narrative of shame. You know, it's sort of, it's like, oh, you have to be anonymous because you're an alcoholic, and you have to be ashamed of that. I don't know. As I say, I'm probably not saying the right things there, but I mean, I just think that also that part of also what advocacy is about is to try and change the conversation, and in terms of the sorts of, um, I mean, we do have many victims in our society, but we also have to sort of um, do what we can to empower them, and not to lay more layers of shame into these areas. And I think that with healthcare, it's a big challenge. Um, David, did you have? Let me see. Yeah, David, you've and in the chat he said that you worked at a hospital, so yeah, I would appreciate if you would share some of your insight in terms of how to deal with these
Okay, there's some basic things that are not in the discussion. Most hospitals have a collection of social workers that are there to advise families on financial matters, trying to arrange places to go. It doesn't, as far as I know, it doesn't matter how much money you have, but essentially they're there partly, honestly, obviously, to make sure the hospital gets paid. But my sense is there are people there to advise you. A number of hospitals already have established a position of patient advocate or patient experience person. And my sense is those are people that could be contacted. I can't deal with the trust issue because they're people we trust, no matter what thing you're talking about. But it seems to me that would be a place to start talking. I know there are places online. I considered it a couple of years ago when I was sort of out of work of becoming a formal patient advocate, and they would get training. And my sense is, that's something to look into. I don't have it on the top of my head, but I Googled a little bit, honestly, a little bit at the beginning of the meeting. There are groups out there. I'm not sure about the organization you call, but there are people who I think in various areas that are willing to do that. I think it's a good thing to get involved in, but my sense is, you need to do, I think we need, or I should say, we need to do a little more digging to find out exactly what possibilities there are.
Yes, thank you. I think there's a lot of good points, and yeah, there are things where they do have social workers. I had a friend who recently had an experience where, I mean, they didn't seem to be particularly helpful, and also as a sort of as being part of the institution, that they're sort of, I mean, primary client. I mean, isn't it fair to say it's the institution more than the patient? You're muted, David.
I'm muting. I mean, I don't honestly, I'm not arguing that I think they're completely doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. I think the hospitals have those people there specifically so they can get paid. But I think it's a resource. It's something. Um, my sense is in terms of there are various, you know, I'm sure there are books out there about how to take care of your people and all of that. But my sense is it's sort of, I think there are potentially organizations in place or people in place, not necessarily within the hospital. I just, like I say, I don't have time. I don't have it off the top of my head because I didn't realize that's what you had decided to focus on because I missed last week. But my sense is I think there are resources that we could, you know, to look into that would both within and without hospitals. I think it also depends on the hospital. You get a big fancy hospital and they potentially will be, you know, essentially better, potentially, you know, possibly than, you know, the small hospital in, you know, whatever small town America you want to pick. They're going to have a lot less resources.
Yes, yeah, those are good points, and it is. I mean, and I think that it is also becoming more exacerbated as we have, well, we have a a continuing pandemic that we're in the middle of, but we also are continuing. I mean, which has also brought to light. I mean, just what a mess we're in a lot of ways. I mean, it's just sort of really kind of crazy that there aren't even the sorts of basic supplies that we would have expected to be there, and so it's sad that we have in our healthcare that really it seems like the biggest player has become the insurance companies, and that we don't get enough from either the doctors or the patients in terms of actually having power to control what is needed for the most successful results. But again, I mean, these are how to sort of deal with specific cases on an individual level is can become much more complicated.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I think one thing that we sort of touched on a little bit that also in terms of having a healthcare proxy and doing that as well is also in terms of advanced medical directives. I mean, in terms of, well, first of all, also, I mean, doing wills. I think that's a very good thing that everyone should do. I still need to do that, but it is something because I think that what sort of happens is that a lot of times we sort of can end up in a situation that we were not ready for because we didn't expect that it would ever happen, you know, and I think that one of the things that we should all have to acknowledge is, yes, we're all eventually going to die, you know, and so that's it's not a pleasant thought, but it is something that I mean, I think that we acknowledge, and that as we become adults, and I mean, I didn't do it that you should think about those issues. You should think about those issues in terms of if you have stuff, who you'd want to have it, what you can do to make things easier for those who survive you. I mean, I think that that's part of what it's doing. And then it's also sort of fundamentally to think about how much medical care you would really want. I mean, it's sort of at this point. I mean, I'm not good. I'm fairly healthy for now, but I mean, at a certain point, if it's going to be really extreme, I mean, expensive things with little hope of success, you know, I mean, maybe you can make a decision about that. But that I think that it's important to write them down, because then you really have to force it and make the decisions. And one of the great things about these sort of advanced medical directives and wills is that if you make a decision and then you change that decision, you can change the paperwork. But I mean, I think that maybe that's also one place that is something that we can all start to think about. David.
The one thing I want to say, I mean, sort of glad to this, absolutely it's important to have an advanced directive with whatever you want. My sense is that have it in place and have it, you know, with your executor and all of that if you're dealing with wills. The one thing I do know also from hospitals that is that in most hospitals, especially if they're teaching hospitals, if you don't have that, then essentially the residents are going to give you every test in the world. They're going to send you to CAT scan and ultrasound, and they're going to take blood every you know, and so on. So essentially, no matter, even if you're not conscious, and that's one of the problems obviously that needs to be dealt with in terms of either the family or a patient advocate.
Wow, that's a really interesting point that I hadn't even really occurred to me in terms of all of the sorts of testing that's done, and how much of it is hopefully, I mean, it's to be helpful, but some of it.
But if you're not really in the picture, then it doesn't bother you.
So, but yeah, but that is, yeah, it is. I mean, well, yeah, I mean, actually, David, I mean, I've been thinking about these in terms of our church. We had a choir member and a sacristan, Monica Neblett, who I mean, had a stroke, and she's, I mean, as I understand it, the last I'd heard, she's still basically in sort of I mean, just if, you know, a vegetative state, and in a coma or whatever, and it's just unfortunate that if somebody ends up in that situation who would prefer not to have been there. I don't really know the specifics of what's going on in that case, but I just thought about it. Yeah.
Just to put your mind at ease, she's surrounded by her family. So if they feel it's, you know, it's their decision, I don't think they're not leaving her out there.
All right. Yeah. Well, that's good to hear, and that's important that there are people there who are making the decision. But it just struck me that if she had the opportunity to make her own decision, I mean, we don't know what it might have been.
Well, I think the fear we all have is the Monty Python fear, right? The rolling the cart by, and it's like, I'm not dead yet.
Yeah. So can we have your liver? Yeah. No, I mean, those sorts of fears, yeah, are I don't really think are justified, but they are there, and there's a lot to fear about it, and so it's natural. But I mean, it's like by avoiding, if fear is leading you to avoid a subject, I mean, you're still, you're gonna have to deal with it at some point. So, but in any event, I mean, I think that. I think that this is there are also, like, yeah, I mean, I didn't find out more about this. I will send the link of this place where you can be certified as a patient advocate, but I believe that most of that is done in terms of for people to get jobs like working in hospitals, being patient advocates. I don't really, so far as what I've been able to find out, we don't have more of a sort of individualized sense of what of that as far as I can see at this point.
Well, I would, if you like, I will do some research as well and send it to you. this week, by next week's meeting.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that I think that we want to be able to. I mean, I think because it's also I want to be out there to share information. I mean, because I think a lot of things happen because we get in a bad situation because we didn't realize what the situation was until it's too late, and so that's why I think it's good to be able to share information about how advocacy can work. So I do. So I mean, I do think that there's also. I mean, there's issues. There's also a lot of issues where a lot of people are alone, and in terms of in terms of our justice system, and in terms of the I mean the how the United States has sort of the largest percentage of people in prison of any country, and that again, this is something I'm not sure how I don't, but I mean I think that a lot of it has to do with there not being sufficient advocacy and sufficient sense of what can be done. Um, uh, what can be other ways of solving these problems? I mean, I think that that's also part of what an advocate can do is to see if there's this solution and this is going to be bad for them and that's going to be bad for their, well, here's something, maybe another way that's sort of less bad, you know, for both. And and I think that also with advocacy that it's about having a sense that it's that what's going to be the best solution for all, as opposed to just what's the best solution for me. And so I don't know. I mean, I'm talking about this sort of idea of like a citizen activist, citizen advocate, when there are sort of professions that deal with these things in terms of, I mean, well, lawyers obviously, and patient advocates in hospitals and things like this. But I just think that there is that doesn't cover everything, because I think that on an individual basis, people need to have someone who can give them an individual approach. Um, so I mean, what I so yeah, I'm sort of struggling with that in terms of where um, is there a role for sort of a not to be. I think there is, and I think there is, and I think that by standing up for what you think is right and standing against what you think is wrong, that's how these issues can be addressed. But I don't know. What would be some of your thoughts on that in terms of, well, we've got professionals that can just take care of this.
I think one of the most important things is all of this stuff is local. The fact is I can't help. Keller, I think, mentioned a couple of weeks ago that he had somebody in a remote town, and my sense is I can't, you know, even if they called me here and I knew what to do, it's other than basically humane things to say to people. My sense is I don't know what's going on in that particular hospital. I think the thing you start with are places close to you. I think when you start talking about, I actually started to write something out, but didn't get it off. If you want to talk about local policing, my sense is you start with the fact that your own town city council, because city councils are the ones that decide that policy. My sense is I think you basically, those are places we have actually power in ways that we wouldn't have in terms of saying we're setting ourselves up as a patient advocacy group and people from California are going to call us. And all we can offer is that we're caring people. And that's a powerful thing, but I'm not sure it's what ultimately, I think, like I say, I think at the local level, close to where we are, I think it's important we can make tremendous changes. And, you know, That's, I think, the best place to start.
I agree. I really, yes. I mean, that it is that if this work, I mean, for it to really be effective, it needs to be done locally and to deal with the local issues. But I think that it is that there's a power that people have to be able to look into things and stand up for what's right, and even just sort of objecting to do something that seems wrong, that can lead to some real change. But it is also, it's got to be in terms of the specifics, dealing with the specific in terms of getting, um, being there to help others. And I think that people have a lot more capacity to be there to help others, if they're aware. I guess it's also like making people aware of opportunities of where they can be an advocate and how they can help. And so I think that needs to start through, um, well, I mean, the dealing with what issues, seem most important to you, and what people, I mean, need help in terms of dealing with these issues. And so, I mean, I think that there's, I guess it's sort of like there's two sort of parts here in terms of a more, I mean, that really, in terms of what we're talking about, that what's really essential is to have actual practical actions, an actual person who's going to be a health care advocate for a specific individual and will be there for them, and is willing to do that. And I think that's important. But I think that also what this meeting can possibly, these meetings can address, is dealing with a more sort of general sort of approach for advocacy, in terms of being able to identify what a problem is, and talking about coming up with possible solutions to it. So, I mean, I think that those are sort of the kind of two tracks, that we can continue focusing on, for like next week's meeting, maybe to talk and, to get further updates in terms of dealing with specific issues, but also sort of to give sort of, I don't know, maybe to work on sort of putting together a kind of an advocacy toolkit of what tools you can use to advocate for others, and how you can reach out and find advocates, and be a better advocate for yourself. So any.
Well, you know, what would be useful is an actual group of people. Like, if this group of people, these specific individuals in this group, or a larger group, you know, a group of 20 that you gradually build, would agree to advocate for one another, then you're cutting out the middlemen, you're cutting out all the other stuff. We can make toolkits till we're blue in the face, and people like the compassion and whatever it is that Eleanor pointed us to, make beautiful toolkits. That doesn't solve our problem. We can have, there's plenty of there's plenty of information out there. There's plenty of goodwill and principles out there. We just don't have individuals who are willing to do the work.
Mm. Yes, that's well said. It is, because it does really come down to that. Ultimately, is individuals willing to step up and be advocates for each other.
Yep. I just checked out, if anybody wants to, I just checked out an organization that had been recommended some time to me by a friend of mine, called patientpal.org. And I sent them an inquiry about about doing this kind of thing for remote setup, and what kind of costs there would be involved in that. That's as close as I've come to any discoveries.
Okay.
I think one thing that's daunting is knowledge. If somebody called us from a hospital now and says, Grandma's in bad shape. We want to know what to do. My sense is you have to know what the medical situation is. You have to know a lot of stuff. You can't just say, oh, well, think of this. I mean, in broad terms, you have to basically really understand the situation. And I would say, even working having worked in a hospital, I don't feel like I know enough. I would be happy to do it. I'm as Keller just said, I'm happy to go and take the plunge and say, this is what you ought to, this is my advice. But my sense is that it's like, you need to know the healthcare system is brutal. It's huge. There are billing issues. There are humane issues, issues of pure humanity and compassion. But my sense is that the one I think we care most about is probably the humanity and the compassion. But that also involves eventually the billing and the whatever and the.
I don't think that we would be looking for someone in our midst who would be a substitute for a doctor. I think, if let's imagine we have a group of 5 people who agree to look after each other, and let's imagine that David says to me, here are my concerns. Here they are listed. Essentially, the kind of thing you do on a living will kind of thing. Here's what I care about, and here are my medications that I'm on regularly. Here are the considerations that. Now, I know you're not a doctor, but if you walk into the hospital, you would be able. You're not a doctor. You're not an insurance guy. That's all true, but it would be sort of like having a well-informed family member coming in to assist. I think. I mean, that would be a very useful. That would be a very useful thing, and it would require a lot of communication between the person who agrees, between both of the parties who agree to support each other, and a lot of sharing of information. But that doesn't seem that impossible to me. I mean, it seems like these are pieces of information that I could probably put on 3 pieces of paper everything you need to know about what it would take to care for me. I could tell you essentially, if you take heroic measures and I'm never going to become conscious again, I'm not interested. That sort of thing. I could say, yes, I'm on 20 milligrams of Crestor once a day and a baby aspirin in the morning. I could pass that on to you. Of course, you're in New York and I'm in Vegas, and I do have people out here who can take care of it. I mean, I do. I have this problem is solved for me. It's not solved for everybody.
Let me mention, though, when I was taking care of 2 geriatric cats who were not in comas ready to say pull the plug, and yet they weren't able to speak for themselves. And I did have to educate myself, particularly about chronic kidney disease and all sorts of test results. You do have to be willing to educate yourself medically sufficiently to be able to make informed decisions. I never expected to become a nurse giving uh, uh, subcutaneous fluids or having to try and figure out all kinds of medical results and what do they mean. But it was a task that I found was put upon me. It was my responsibility to take care of my loved ones. So the
That could even be.
getting the medical education for the particular person you're caring about and caring for is part of the job.
I wonder if that could be partly shared among 2 people, so that somebody like you, Eleanor, who are not particularly mobile. I mean, you're mobile at times, but you're not particularly mobile. but you're quite good at research, and you're quite good at that sort of thing. I wonder if you could pair with someone else who would be, so that you could gather the information, give that information to the other person, and the other person could be the responsible person at the hospital.
I think it's important that one of the most important things to do if you're trying to advise somebody is ask the right questions. That includes the medical situation. But my sense is if I am advising a third party who is in the situation of trying to make a decision, they're not because they're so heavily emotionally involved potentially, they're not in a position necessarily to think of what questions to ask. And I think a person from if you just come in and start asking questions, you'll learn a lot of what you need to know. I don't know what we can do about anybody that's kind of on their own. If somebody says, could you go talk to, there's got to be a closer person, a family person or something.
I will say, I'm not as good at research as you seem to think I am, but I am excellent at asking questions. Not so good at answering them, perhaps, but asking the questions, I'm good at that.
Yeah, well, and I think that is asking the questions is really important in terms of for our own things and dealing with whatever sort of medical issues we have to ask the questions. But sometimes because it's personal, it's harder for you. And sometimes if you're also asking somebody else, you can get a broader sense of what are the questions that need to be asked. And but I guess, I mean, so yeah, I do think that the most sort of salient point is how to sort of put this into practical operation in terms of how can we sort of form a group or cohort who's going to be there for each other in terms of dealing with this. And what specifically that entails, and what sort of how to sort of implement something like that, some sort of agreement. I mean, sort of mutual working together of these things, and so that is. I mean, yeah, I think that's. But I do really like the importance of asking questions, because I think the importance of asking questions can also be for whoever you are advocating for to force them to sometimes answer some questions that they may not want to deal with. I mean, because we all have things that we're going to push off to the side and possibly want to avoid, but we. If we're there for someone else and caring for them, that can give us the right to ask those questions and can give you this sort of trust that you can, I mean, feel safe to answer those questions.
Can I say something?
Yeah, Lulu, please.
I didn't even think about this this issue just before, like Paul, you set up the meeting like this. I kind of understand because everybody talks and have so much insight. And I want to first just regard Eleanor said about asking questions. This is my my thought. I think people who can ask the right question, ask the good question, because they have the insight to the problem, the broken system for the state. In this our case, it's a health system, and so we need people like that to see what is exactly the problem is. So then we search for the solution to solve the problem. And then another thing is I put that at very end. Another thing is when Taylor said find people who are intelligent and also resourceful, and Eleanor said find people who are trustworthy. And then David said something about the right person. I'm sorry, David, my internet is not very stable, so I missed a few talk while you were talking.
I think it's my microphone.
Okay, then I think that I think you three hit the point. For some profession, you cannot just hire anybody to do it. If this kind of advocate for this healthcare have to be somebody who has a mission. They treat it as a mission, not just a job to make money. Because I see so many people in the hospital, in the medicine field, even including some doctors. They are not in that field to serve people or to treat people or to save people's life. They are in that field to just, they have no, especially like the healthcare aid. A lot of people, I find them, they hate what they're doing. It's not that they don't like what they hate it. They hate it. Every day they go to work. Before they go to work, they wish somebody just died, and then they don't have to serve that person. So then, so Paul said that if you set up the advocate, have to choose the right people, have to choose the people who are really treat this as a mission. This is my calling in life. This is calling from God, and I'm not paid, I will do it. Have to be somebody like this. That's why the hospitals, the social worker, they are supposed to do the job like this. They are, in certain degree, they failed. But my personal had one experience that was very mild case. A 20-some-year-old young person, when I was so stressed out, so upset, and was sent to the hospital with some like a heart problem. And then she was so kind. She's the social worker in the hospital. She was so kind and knowledgeable, so caring. The way she talked to me, I feel all my disease disappeared already. That's this kind of people you want to be in this kind of, because you cannot just pick up anybody, every Joe on the street, and then they want to make a living. They want to have some paycheck. No, they are not going to do a good job. And then my last question is, because I have a family member who was sick, not the virus, not this coronavirus, but he was in hospital for, I think for a month and a half. He died last night. He was not allowed to have family. We cannot visit him. Nobody can visit him. He had a 5-year-old, he had a wife, we are the relatives, so we cannot visit him. So one day his sister went to visit him, and they were standing outside the window, outside the window. And then the window was open, and he said, oh, it's so beautiful outside. Because when you're stuck in hospital, you feel so stuffy mentally, not just physically. You're restrained in hospital, and you're restrained in bedridden. But you also feel so stuffy mentally. You feel like, I want to go out and just running on the street and just let myself. You have that one. But then for this case, I want to ask everybody, for this case, how can you advocate? You want to say, we want to visit the family. No, you cannot. This is a virus, because he's not, we can all test it and we can go visit him, but they don't let you to. How can you advocate in this case if they set a policy? So I think maybe advocate for the will, for the when the person who are in a very weak situation, they cannot make phone call or that will be practical. But for these kind of things, how can we do that? The hospital just don't let you go in. And then finally, he was dying. The doctor said he's not going to live long. And then the last day, they let people go in, let family go in, but one by one. You cannot go to because of social distancing. It's just so ridiculous. We can test it. We can go to test it. 5 minutes come out. We don't carry the virus. But of course, he was weak and he cannot be infected. And then there will be last straw on him, and he will be gone. His life will be gone. But then he would he had such a miserable 6-7 weeks in the hospital without any family to visit him. And the very last day, yesterday, the family went in because the doctor knew he was going to die. So it doesn't matter anymore. He was going to send the hospice. So then let the family, just one family member at a time, you go there. But he was not even talking. He was not even conscious. He would grow, his eyes were shut, and then they said that he was sleeping. He was not really sleeping. He was in such a pain, gave a lot of morphine, those kind of things. So how can you advocate for this case? Because they set a policy. This is my question. Thank you.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot there, Lulu. Thank you for the question. I mean, I think there are obviously even special circumstances today still with Corona and still in terms of ways we do it. But I think it also
I
reflects.
was not allowed, when my father was dying of cancer and I was a child, I was not allowed to visit him because children weren't allowed to be visitors because children have germs, and maybe I would give my father dying of cancer a cold, and heaven forfend. I mean, what difference would that make anyway? But it's very cruel. I know day after day after day, my mother would go upstairs and visit him. And day after day after day, I would sit downstairs in the lobby and read because I couldn't visit him. And I didn't have a father, even though he was alive and he was conscious, I still had no way to communicate with him. And I think it's important that we have a healthcare advocate that can be designated with the legal right to go into the room, even of a person with COVID, as an essential worker, with the right to go in there and see that the person is not being neglected. And if it is not possible with the current legislation, then we need to agitate for that to change, because this current situation is simply not acceptable.
Yeah. Well, and I hear you, and I think, yeah, there's a lot there, and there's a lot where hospitals, and I mean, where they sort of make rules and don't really give give patients a voice, and ultimately, I mean, the patient is the customer, and they should be accommodated is in a reasonable way. And I think that sort of one of the other things about being an advocate is to try and question these assumptions, and I think there is a lot of stuff that needs to be done on a more macro level. But then, I mean, I think our focus really needs to be on the more micro level of actually being there to help people. And I think that even on a micro level, pushing back against these hospital just keeping people out is something that needs to be looked at. I mean, in terms of, even if you were a healthcare proxy, I don't know how you could get. I mean, it'd be up to the hospital to sort of say you were essential enough to be able to go in there, and unless there's some sort of legislative way of doing that, it's going to depend on the hospital. But anyways, I do try and yeah. Do you have something you want to add, David? Or
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I am aware, peripherally, Eleanor, I'm sorry I wasn't there, I wasn't there when what you took, but it's horrible. But I think one of the things that I understand that you can do is become a mediator. In that situation today, if you were again an outside person, you could maybe have some kind of agreement to say, okay, your mother can carry you in the door. I don't know how old you were, but essentially can bring you to the door so that you can at least see and communicate. Right now, we recognize supposedly that 6 feet will keep us safe, but my sense is that there are compromises in the face of hospital. And anecdotally, I remember reading of a few instances of that. But my sense that that's also a thing that a patient advocate needs to consider. It's not just, the legal and this and that and the other. It's the human things that are important.
Yeah, I was between the ages of 9 and 11 as he was dying. So I wasn't, a babe in arms.
So,
And I wasn't allowed there at all. Except once some woman who found out about my situation agitated that I should have the right to visit my father on Christmas, which is pretty funny because we aren't Christians. And I pointed that out to her and she said, well, don't you want to see your father on Christmas? I said, I want to see him any day. I want to see him every day. But she agitated for me to have the right to see him on Christmas. Once.
and did you?
Yes.
Well, that's what I say. A third party can maybe put all the parties together and say, let's do the right thing here. But,
Yeah.
I have one more thing to ask Paul. Since you're doing this citizen network advocate, can you put, when you come out with like a basic idea, can you put it into like a kind of like a suggestion, a bullet point, and send to the government? Because they need to improve the whole system. So that will, if they put it into the law and the most, yeah, that will help much better. But then at the same time, there's one element have to be added in. They have to hire somebody who has a sense of mission. Some jobs, you just cannot hire anybody to do it. That's my personal opinion. That's all.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, we will try and do more in terms of writing up some of these ideas that we've talked about. But I do think that it is important to keep it personal and to see what we can do for others and to talk more about that and also share the resources that we find on it. So I guess in terms of thank you all for coming today. We've gone a little sort of over time, and I just wanted to thank you all for your very sort of constructive ideas, and that just wanted to see if there were any sorts of last thoughts you wanted to have or anything on this, and. But I want to thank you, and I think that next week that we'll try and focus in terms of what it is, just to put together a group of people to be advocates for each other. So, so is there any other final words anybody would like to make before we finish here?
It was a very educational meeting. I learned a lot. I want to say thank you. My sister was sorry she couldn't join in today, but she's ill. She may be contacting you later by email today.
Okay. All right.
If it's okay, my mom had a question about something about lawyers and judges.
Yes, yes. I am still feeling very sad over that last meeting when they accused.
Well, let's hang on, hold that thought, Dolores. Hold that thought. Let's just I think I just want to end the meeting, and the rest of you can sign off, and then I'll talk with Kenneth and Dolores about our sort of specific situation, and then we can also talk more next week about being advocates for each other, and in the healthcare sense. And what's required and entails and setting up something like that. All right.
Thanks, Paul.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Bye. 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 Bye, Eleanor. Let's see who else. Lulu, you can just sign off now, or else I will just remove you because I just want to talk to.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, bye-bye.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Lulu. Bye. All right. Okay. All right. If she,
You can send me off.
okay. I'm just going to remove you then, Lulu. Bye-bye. I will see you next week, hopefully. All right. Hey. Okay. So now it's just us. Now we can.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if this